Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, not only that, but guilty.
Yes. Strategy.
And this is very nice time. Thank you for excellent.
Jau paspēja ieslēgt. Kā ir, kad mēs varam sākt, es man teiks. Tu vari sākt? Jā, faktiski, mēs jau visu ir klāt, kameras visu.
Yeah. At the same time,
Pārbaudīt, lai darbojas.
Paliek šeit.
Latvijas izglītības un zinātnes ministrijā kopātie kolēģi un esam priecīgi jūs šodien sveikt gan šīs darba nedēļas cēlienu, gan tādā zināmā mērā arī pavasara darbu cēlienu noslēgt jau patīkamā un nopietnā un svarīgā gaisotnē, proti Latvijai pievienojoties Ekonomiskās, sadarbības un attīstības organizācijai. Šodien runāsim tieši par novērtējumu, atbilstību, sasniegumiem izglītības un arī zinātnes jomās. Šodien mēs drusciņi ieskicējot šī rīta cēliena darba kārtību, jo šī diena mums vairāk veltīta vispārējām rekomendācijām, bet vairāk akcentējot augstākās izglītības jomu rīta daļā ministrijā un mēs drusciņi vēlāk turpinot sadarbībā ar Eiropas komisiju diskusijas. Tātad šīs dienas kārtība uz ministru uzruna un OECD prasmju direktora prezentācija, kura būs angļu valodā, jums tiks izsūtīta visiem pasākumu dalībniekiem elektroniski pēc šī pasākuma. Un pēc prezentācijas jums būs iespēja uzdot jautājumus un arī padziļinātāku interviju, kad arī būs pieejams tulkojums. Tā kā ķersimies pie lietas, un es aicināšu izglītības un zinātnes ministru teikt uzrunu nākamā pasākumā.
Dear Mr. Šleihers, dārgie kolēģi, dāmas un kungi, mediju pārstāvji, visi klātesošie, šodien mums ir svētku diena. Un tie ir svētki ar labi padarītu darba apziņu, bet tie ir arī svētki ar ieskatu nākotnē uz nemazāk atbildīgiem, grūtiem, veicamiem darbiem, jo mēs neesam ne ceļa galā, ne ceļa vidū, bet mēs esam ļoti nopietnā ceļa sākumā. Un pirmkārt es gribētu pateikt milzīgu paldies tam visam lielajam komandas darbam, faktiski, noteikti 3, bet vispār 5 gadu garumā, visās tehniskajās sarunās, komitejās. Lielu paldies arī visiem OECD ekspertiem, kas ir ieguldījuši laiku, prātu, enerģiju un mums ļoti palīdzējuši. Tātad 21. komitejā ir noslēdzies darbs. Man ir prieks, ka izglītības un zinātnes komitejas nebija varbūt tās, protams, ir svarīgākās un smagākās, bet nebija tās, kas mums radītu lielas bažas, vai šis process tiešām sekmīgi un laikā noslēgsies. Mans nopelns pie šīm divām komitejām ir ļoti vienkārši pasakāms, nekāds. Jo šajā amatā esmu ļoti nesen, bet vairāk man ir iznācis saskarties, pateicoties iepriekšējiem amatam, ar tām problēmām, kas mums ir bijušas banku sektoru uzraudzībā, kur tiešām likās, kā nu būs. Bet mans gandarījums ir par to, ka tās reformas, ko jūsu kolēģi veicat gadu garumā un kuras mēs šobrīd kā komanda turpinām un attīstām, ir ļoti labā korelācijā ar OECD ekspertu rekomendācijām. Un es gribu arī īpaši paldies pateikt iepriekšējām valdībām. Parasti jau par komandas darbu paldies saka kapteinim, tātad Valdim Dombrovskim un Mendotai Straujumai. Un mūsu pašreizējās komandas kapteinis Kučinska kungs ir sekmīgi novadījis šo finiša taisni. Un, protams, milzīgs paldies ārlietu ministrijai par koordinējošo lomu visā šajā grūtajā darbā. Tātad man ir gods uzrunāt jūs šai dienā, šai simboliskajā brīdī, kad ir saņemts apstiprinājums par Latvijas līdzdalību. Kā lai to saka, 80% ekonomikas klubā. Un, protams, ka runājot par izglītību un zinātni, laikam mūsu darbs būs visatbildīgākais, jo faktiski izglītība visos tās posmos un zinātne ir tas barometrs, kas nosaka nākotnes ekonomisko klimatu. Jo bez izrāviena izglītībā zinātnē mums, protams, nav iespējama ne tautsaimniecības attīstība, kā mēs to gribam sagaidīt, ne arī dzīves līmeņa augšana Latvijā, kādu mēs to gribam sagaidīt un kādu mums ir viss pamats gaidīt nākotnē, ja mēs sekmīgi turpinām reformas. Pēdējā laikā par reformām izglītībā lielākoties runā par pedagoģa algu modeli. Man jau ir pat mazliet atlicis par to runāt. Bet mums ir jāsaprot, ka tas ir viens no kopējas lielas sistēmas elementiem, jo tomēr mūsu izglītības sistēma ir orientēta uz skolēnu. Uz to, ko mēs no mazotnes, sākot no pirmsskolas, visos izglītības posmos, līdz augstskolai, doktorantūrai un turpmākam darbam zinātnē, esam ielikuši jaunajā cilvēkā, lai viņš būtu modernas, uz attīstību orientētas, kooperatīvas sabiedrības loceklis. Un pedagoģa algu reforma, skolu tīkla optimizācija ir absolūti nepieciešamas lietas, kas ir ārkārtīgi svarīgas izglītības kvalitātes nodrošināšanā. Ja mēs sāksim no 18. 19. mācību gada mūsu jauno kompetencēs balstīto izglītības saturu, ko 4 gados mēs ieviešam visā skolas posmā, tad ir ļoti svarīgi, kas šo saturu realizēs skolā, kas būs tie pedagoģi. Vai pedagoga karjera būs pievilcīga no finanšu viedokļa, vai skolu tīkls būs tā sakārtots, ka mēs spēsim investēt pietiekami nopietnā infrastruktūrā, pietiekami nopietnā mācību kabinetu aprīkojumā, mācību līdzekļu klāstā, mācību metožu ieviešanā. Tas ir milzīgs uzdevums un milzīgs darbs. Un skatoties uz OECD rekomendācijām, kas mums ir izglītības un zinātnes jomā, izlasot, protams, ne tikai virsrakstus, bet arī to, kas ir ieteikts darīt, ir tiešām redzams, ka tur ir ļoti nopietns ekspertu darbs ieguldīts. Un ne izglītības sistēma viena spēja atrisināt visus jautājumus. Lielā mērā mūsu skolu tīkls ir šajā brīdī diemžēl nesakārtots, tāpēc, ka mūsu administratīva teritoriālā reforma nav bijusi tik sekmīga, kā mums būtu gribējies. Un ir ārkārtīgi svarīga mūsu sadarbība ar pašvaldībām, lai kopīgi ar savstarpēju izpratni ietu šo ceļu tālāk uz priekšu. Un no OECD minētajām rekomendācijām es gribētu uzsvērt dažus, proti, kas ir, manuprāt, ārkārtīgi būtiski tiešām mums tuvākajā laikā izdarīt, tā ir izglītības iestāžu vadītāju profesionālās darbības vērtēšanas uzsākšana. Tā ir izglītības kvalitātes vērtēšanas uzsākšana pirmsskolā. Jo kādreiz, ziniet, katrā jokā ir daļa joka un daļa patiesības, un es mēdzu jokot, ka vissvarīgākais ir bērndārs. Un vismazākā atbildība ir doktorantūras vadītājiem. Jo tad ir disertācija vai nav. Protams, labāk, ja ir. Bet tas, ko mēs ieliekam mūsu visjaunākajai paaudzei, pirmsskolas izglītības iestādē, ir faktiski tas, kas nosaka bērna, jaunieša un pieaugušā mūsu sabiedrības locekļa visu tālāko dzīves gājumu. Pirmkārt, vai zināšanas, izglītība būs tiešām vērtība un augstākā prioritāte šim cilvēkam? Vai viņš gribēs mācīties visu mūža garumā? Vai viņš sapratīs, ka dzīve nemitīgi mainās un lai cik bagāta būtu zināšanu bagāža šobrīd, nākotnē tās vērtība ļoti strauji krītās, ja tā netiek atjaunota un paplašināta. Tātad pirmsskola ir lielā mērā panākuma atslēga. Un, kas ir ārkārtīgi svarīgi, tā ir izglītības iestāžu dibinātāji, un tā skaitā pašvaldību, jo vispārējā izglītībā mums skolas ir pašvaldību iestādes. Tātad pašvaldību izpratnes stiprināšana par izglītības kvalitāti un tās vērtēšanu, veicinot dibinātāju iesaisti, tātad gan skolu tīkla sakārtošanā, gan izglītības kvalitātes nodrošināšanā, savu funkciju ietvaros un savas kompetences ietvaros šais skolās. Tā kā darāmā mums ir ārkārtīgi daudz, mēs nedrīkstam apstāties. Mēs, protams, drīkstam vienu brīdi sev tā draudzīgi uzsist pa plecu, ka esam labu ceļu nogājuši, bet, mīļie kolēģi, viss ceļš vēl ir priekšā. Būsim attīstīto valstu kluba biedri. Tas ir ļoti liels, tā skaitā arī uzticības kredīts, un es domāju, ka skatoties uz jūsu laimīgajām sejām, es saprotu, ka mēs šo kredītu spēsim godam nokārtot. Lai mums visiem veicas, lai šodien ražana diena un turpinām strādāt. Paldies!
Nākamo darbības soļu iezīmēšanu, lai mēs atcerētos, ka pēc šīm divām dienām par diskusijām mēs noteikti ķeramies pie nākamajiem darāmajiem darbiem. Un šobrīd dodot vārdu Andreassam Šleiheram, kas ir OECD Izglītības un prasmju direktorāta vadītājs. Tas ir mums direktorāts, kas strādā ar mums ļoti jau labu laiku pazīstamām programmām, kā TIS, kā TALIS, pieaugušo kompetenci vērtējums. Zinām arī, ka, lai arī rekomendācijas tiek formētas vārdos, viņas rodās no analīzes, un OECD laikam ir viena no tām organizācijām, kas visvairāk savu reputāciju saist ar datiem un pierādījumos balstītu politiku. Tāpēc paskatīsimies, kā izskatāmies no šīs perspektīvas. Lūdzu,
Thank you very much, and I start with an apology to do my presentation in English. I hope you follow it well. First of all, it's a great privilege and pleasure to join you, Minister and colleagues, at this day as Latvia is joining the OECD. I think it's a great moment for all of us. There's a lot the world can learn from Latvia. You've been one of the very few countries in the OECD, in the world, that has been able to do more with less, raising the quality of education at the very same time as you had to go through a very, very difficult economic transition. And making education sustainable, making the tough and right choices to continue to build on this success is still something that is a formidable priority. We are not new to each other. In fact, I see Mr. Kangro here. We have been working since the late 90s on some of the OECD projects, so Latvia is an old friend of the OECD. We learn a lot from you, and today we share our advice to Latvia with you. And I'm going to talk through this, starting with the early years and ending with lifelong life learning. Perhaps the biggest challenge for most of our economies today. Making sure that we're not just filling young people up with important knowledge, but that knowledge itself becomes the driver of our success. That we continue to learning throughout our lives and build the foundations for the next economy. And let's start with the early years. Participation in early childhood education and care in Latvia has always been robust, at least when you talk about children in the age of 3 or 4-year-olds. Latvia compares quite favorably. We want to talk a bit about quality as well. That's perhaps where the bigger challenges lie. There's a highly localized service in Latvia, run by the municipalities, and we don't yet see as much of a return on that investment as we do see in some other countries. Access is good. Quality is probably still an issue that we need to think about. But when you look at progress that has been made, you know, this is actually quite a good way of looking at it. When you look at the trends in this is where Latvia was in 2002. You could see basically every year, every few years, a lot of enrollment has been added, particularly as children grow towards the age of 5. You can talk about universal childhood education and care in Latvia, almost. At the very same time, we also see important, we are going to see important disparities in this yet between rural communities and urban areas. Something still to work on. The most impressive progress is perhaps the one that we've seen in science, where you can really see the world has been rather flat. That's the blue line over the last few years, and that's an important lesson for Latvia perhaps as well. OECD countries have, different from Latvia, been very generous in investing more money in fewer students, but we have not seen improvements in outcomes. Money is not a guarantee for better outcomes. Latvia has gone the other way around, actually been going through a very tough transition, but you could see really this was the gap in 2006. In 2012, you can see actually Latvia ahead of the OECD in science performance. The science is one of the key ingredients for the future of our economies. In reading, you can see important progress. In mathematics, a little bit so. Latvia has been on a good and consistent path of progress in terms of the quality of learning outcomes. High upper secondary graduation, consistently high, and Latvia has a long history of high attainment. That makes you actually different from many OECD countries where progress in education is often been quite recent. You have a very, very strong history of valuing education, making sure that people make the investments, get good attainment. You can see even in the old age group 55 to 64-year-olds, those nearing retirement, very high levels of attainment, much higher than they are in many other countries. In the young population, that's also a warning signal. What once used to be a strategic asset for Latvia, a high level of education, is now everywhere the case. Among the young, you're no longer that competitive, just average. Not because standards have declined in Latvia, but because they've risen fast everywhere else. I'm going to come back to that topic many times today. What was once, special is becoming quickly the norm. More and more countries actually catching up, making progress. Early school leavers, still an issue in Latvia, and people who are not completing the foundations for various reasons. But you can see actually how actually that has improved. You compare 2010 with 2014, and you can see really Latvia has been among the countries doing well in making sure that people leave at least with the minimal entrance ticket to the knowledge economy. Good progress. Still, there is a sizable minority of people who are not meeting that benchmark yet. So more needs to be done, and you can see some countries here on the right side, on the left side of you, that basically have shown we can make sure that all young people reach better education. Progress to tertiary education, one of the big strengths of Latvia. When you look at those who actually aspire to advanced degrees, Latvia is very, very much at the frontier, and that is even true also in the area of vocational education training. Most young people have this dream to continue with their learning, to continue with their education, making sure that they make the right choices, that they study things that are actually, changing their lives, changing the economy, changing the society of Latvia. That perhaps is still a formidable challenge for your country. The future is not about more of the same education. The future is more about, the kind of skills that will help us become competitive and collaborative. Attainment, very good. Still, again, when it comes to quality, there's a lot of things that we could be discussing. Your demographic context is absolutely challenging. Fewer children being born since a long time. You cannot reverse that trend in the short term. That's going to hit your school system, or has already hit your school system, is hitting your university system. And dealing with that strategically, perhaps the toughest challenge facing your country. And the lesson that we have learned in the OECD, if you start cutting everywhere a little bit, you end up a lot worse off than where you are today. If you use that as an opportunity to make strategic choices, to think about, where do we make our investments best? How do we make trade-offs, choices? You can come out a lot stronger out of the situation. And difficult choices. How do you make balance the quantity and the quality of teaching? You look at this across OECD countries, the best performing education systems in the world. Whenever they have to make a choice between a better teacher and a smaller class, they've gone for the better teacher. That's difficult to do. But we're going to come to this. This is the context in which you have to operate. These are the children, people you've got across age groups, and this big slump here is one that and later on, this is going to feed through to the right side. At the same time, you look at investment, very low by OECD standards. And your education system today is your economy tomorrow. So again, investing in the future. And that's something, we can learn, Latvia is not the only country with limited budgets. We can learn that from East Asia. Whenever look to a country like China. Chinese are going to invest, parents and grandparents are going to invest the last money that they have in the future of their country, in their education. In Europe, we have already spent the money of our children for our consumption today. That's why we have the amount of that. Getting those choices in a tough context, I think, is something you've got to look at. And the world is going to look a lot tougher. We're not living in a static world. A couple of years ago, you might have seen this cover of The Economist suggesting that about half of the jobs that we know today are subject to digitization. And the dilemma for education is that the kind of things that are easiest to teach, easiest to test, are precisely the kind of things that are easiest to digitize, automate, and outsource. Doing more of the same is not going to help our children to be fit for the future. And this is not just about, robots taking over all factories. That's the simple side of it. You can take today a smart car, driving without somebody, without an accident. So the city of Riga, what is it going to do? So the kind of world that we know today. Think about augmented reality. You can bring the world's most advanced knowledge into what you do right now. What does this mean? It means the world no longer rewards us just for what we know. Google knows everything. The world rewards us for what we can do with what we know. Why do I say this? I've talked about the great success Latvia has seen in, raising outcomes, learning outcomes. But if you look at this a little bit finer, you can see that students are very, very good when it comes to reproducing subject matter knowledge. Our students are a little less good when it comes to creative using, applying, extrapolating from that knowledge. That's where the future is. So again, it's about thinking about how we can do things differently. There's a lot more things to come. I'm not going to talk about this. This is just a chart I want to leave you with, because I think that it's a very, very important part of the context. We are seeing fewer jobs with manual skills because machines are taking this over. But the steepest decline is really in what we call routine cognitive jobs. Doing things with our brain that we do every day, every minute in the same way. That's where computers are best. That's where people, your children, your students are going to find the hardest time. The future is with those, who can extrapolate, use their knowledge creatively, solve innovative problems. And the future is with those who can actually collaborate, compete, and connect with people who think differently. Social skills. Big changes in the way in which our society uses the talent of people. Big lesson for our education system. So that brings me to some of the choices and recommendations that we have come up with. And I'll start with the easy part, early childhood education and care. I talked about the success of Latvia of raising access, but when you look at the very youngest children, there are still important gaps. When you look at this, basically there, Latvia still have a long way to go, the 0 to 2-year-olds, making sure that they have a place to go, high quality provision. You look at inequalities. Overall, actually, I must say Latvia does well in terms of equity. The impact of social background on the success of children in Latvia is much less pronounced than in the large European countries. Certainly a lot less than in North America. But you can see basically when you look at the institutions in urban areas, things have gone well. When you think in terms of rural areas, things have been pretty much flat. That in part reflects, of course, the demography, and that you can see reflected in enrollment. Closing that gap, making sure that access rates remain access remains available for children throughout your country is something you should not lose sight of. Your workforce, rapidly aging, again an outgrowth of your demography. Lack of standards for quality early childhood education provision. Mainly history of who is working there. What does it mean to do that job well? What are the professional standards of doing this? That's still sort of a challenge for your country, for many countries. I've taken all early childhood education and care in the past as something that is about caring for children. Now we need to give the learning more emphasis, thinking through, what do we want? What kind of skills, social skills, emotional qualities, cognitive skills? What is it that young children should acquire in those early years? How do we prepare them? And that's an area where the staff qualifications are going to be absolutely key. Part that is reflected in your pay levels. And I'm going to say the same for school teachers. Your salary levels are very, very low by OECD standards. Now,
if you give every teacher more money, that's wonderful, but it's not going to change the outcomes. So thinking about ways how you can strategically align more investments in better salaries with better outcomes, that's the challenge. Just, rolling out more money. Many countries have done it when they were rich. Very little to show for. Thinking about, whose salary you raise, how you can introduce more differentiation in the profession, better career perspectives. Those are really, really difficult questions, but ones that we view as fundamental for success, and the world has shown us that they are fundamental for success. Need for strengthening data collection, monitoring, research use. This is perhaps something where Latvia is a case in point. We have not seen much of an advantage as those who go to early childhood education and care have later in school. In many countries, you can basically say, if you attended early childhood education and care, you're going to be a lot better off at age 15 when you do the PISA test. Not true in Latvia. That relationship doesn't exist. Now that tells you very little bit about, early childhood education and care today. This is what happened, 15 years ago. But still, to what extent have those things changed? To what extent has the quality of provision improved? This piece of data raises some really important questions about these things to work harder on. And then you can look at sort of regional disparities, local disparities. You'll take it for granted. You've been living in this country for a long time. When we look at this from the outside, Latvia is a country that is rather fragmented. A lot of kind of regional, local responsibilities. It's rather unusual in the OECD context. If you run a small municipality, you have a lot of responsibilities on your shoulders, more than in many other countries. But the price for this is what you can see here quite well. Building sort of stronger networks of municipalities. They're getting municipalities to work together strategically, share resources, have joint projects. If you're a small municipality, how do you manage actual human resource development, attracting, retaining, developing teachers? Those are challenges where you need a critical mass. Very hard to do in a highly localized kind of network, and in early childhood education, that is more visible. So what do we suggest? Well, access, particularly for the very young, will remain a challenge. More important is to take a more strategic perspective on raising quality. And the quality of education will never exceed the quality of the staff. Making sure, strengthening evidence. Very difficult at the moment for us. It was quite difficult to see something about the quality of early childhood education and care. And governance and financing, in a highly localized system is going to be an ongoing challenge. Let's talk a bit about primary and secondary education, schools. Again, that's your demography, that's your context. Student numbers have gone down a lot. Teacher numbers have gone down a little. That gap has put huge pressures on your system. Cutting student numbers faster than numbers of teachers means actually that teachers are left worse off. Sometimes students are left worse. The difficult choice between, quality and quantity of teachers is one that you can see very, very clearly in that picture. This is very tough. Very few countries have been able to manage this. Creating more differentiated career patterns. And touching money more closely to outcomes. Attracting the most talented teachers to the most challenging classrooms. Those are the tough challenges facing Latvia, and getting those minds better in tune will be key to the future. Once again, whenever high-performing countries have to make a choice between, a smaller class and a better teacher, they go for the better teacher. Disparities, inequity across the Latvian school system, As I said, overall you're doing well by OECD standards on this. I think there's a lot other countries can learn from Latvia in countering social disadvantage. But you can still see that there is, you know, if you live in a city, in Riga and so on, and you live in a rural area, there is a performance gap. And it comes back to the structure of the school system, you know. This is a very, very difficult choice. You know, if you take a school out of a village which has become too small, you take the heart out of the village. Nobody wants to do that. At the very same time, if you leave the school and you leave the children in that environment, they will not get the quality of service they deserve. And you're not the only country in that context. Now, one country that has, you know, had to bite that bullet about 20 years ago was Portugal. There are 29,000 schools. Some of the schools had, you know, 5, 10 students. They have been able to do that, and it's become one of the most rapidly improving school systems among OECD countries, giving students a better future. Political economy of this is very, very difficult. Nobody likes to close a school. Think of the children. That's where they stand today. Huge performance gap. You know, this is equivalent to 1 year of schooling. And 1 year of schooling is a huge earnings gap and quality gap in your life later on. Evaluation and assessment. How do we know what we know? It's a huge challenge in many school systems today. Assessment evaluation is only one thing, but having the right information at your fingertips. And I'm not just talking about, you know, government. They have actually reasonably good information in Latvia. Data on tests and so on. But what about school principals? What about teachers? How does a school in Latvia know how well are we doing compared to our neighboring schools? Compared to schools that are similar to us? We want to build stronger networks of schools, get people to collaborate, exchange. This is very, very important. And I'm not just going on talking about, you know, test data, outcome data. It's equally important for process data. I'll give you an example. You know, if you are a teacher in Shanghai in China, you will typically upload your lesson plans on a collaborative platform that is shared in the province. And the trick is the more other teachers download your lessons, criticize your lessons, improve your lessons, use your lessons, the more popular you become in the system. And at the end of the school year, your principal will ask you not just, you know, how well did you teach your students in their class, but what contribution did you make to improving our education system? Using the talent of teachers to improve the system, bringing people together in a system rather than just, you know, leaving them in isolation in the classroom. One of the fundamental challenges that relies on very, very good information systems, data systems that we haven't seen yet in Latvia. Building that kind of culture. Knowledge production, knowledge use in the system is going to be very, very key, and then bringing that back into making strategic choices in building systems of accountability. And, you know, people don't like that word accountability. It talks like, you know, I have to report to someone. But when we talk about this in our recommendations, we look at this more in terms of professional accountability. How do I know what I can learn from my colleagues? How do I share my wisdom? Again, if you're a teacher in Japan, you're going to prepare your lessons together with other teachers. You're going to look at the outcomes of your lessons. You're going to do demonstration lessons to other teachers. You're constantly engaged with other people in the system. So, I think a very important part of the system. I have already mentioned, you know, pay levels in Latvia. You are the last. And that has basically, you know, you have this huge cut in salaries in 2009. In some cases, less than half of the money being left. You've recuperated a little bit of that, but again, you know, it is still something where your teachers are not competitive with pay. You want to attract the best and brightest into the teaching profession. You have to do something about that. And again, that means not about, you know, raising everybody's salary. That will change nothing. It is about making the tough choices, creating a more differentiated profession. Many countries are good models, big and large countries. Where there's a career, the first day you enter your school, your school principal is going to ask you, what do you want to do in your life? In teaching, in management, in curriculum design, curriculum development. And every day you're going to invest in your professional career. And as you advance, you will get more money and you will play a bigger role in the education system. Kind of one-size-fits-all culture, a very flat salary structure, no salary differentiation, will not keep the best people in Latvia's school system. We have plenty of evidence for that. It's not just levels of salaries, it's a lack of perspectives. Many, many teachers express concerns about it. The lack of meritocracy. We ask Latvian teachers in our Talis survey, is the most advanced teachers going to get the most public recognition? And many teachers in your country say, no. There's no link between the effort I put into the system and what the system will do for me. And money is a smaller part of the issue. It is more an issue of giving teachers true perspective. So pay level is something, if you want to keep your system sustainable. In a way, you're building your success on the past. Teaching used to be highly respected, but it's not sustainable for your future. And I want to sort of show you this a little bit. Unfortunately, here I don't have data for Latvia, but I want to show you about the difficult choices that countries have. This is an indicator of how much countries spend relative to their wealth. Right? If your dot is very high, you invest a lot. If your dot is very low, you invest very little. And you can see one way in which you can invest money is in paying teachers well. And Korea is the best example. Since the 1960s, they pay their teachers better than almost anybody else. In Latvia, you get paid less well than a civil servant with similar qualifications. In Korea, you get paid a lot more. The Koreans also invest in learning time, making sure that students have enough hours. And the Koreans invest in one thing that is also important, and that is making sure that people have time to do other things than teaching. Professional development, peer collaboration. Those ingredients for professionalization, very, very important. And now you ask me, how can they do all of this and only spend that much? The answer is clusters. They basically have their students learning in very large classes, and that allows them to buy all of those things that are important for the quality of teaching. You compare that with Luxembourg. No? Same spending levels in Korea. But Luxembourg spends its money very differently. In Luxembourg, everybody likes small classes. Teachers like them, parents like them, and so on. That has driven the cost of education in Luxembourg. Now even Luxembourg can spend its money only once. And the outcome of this is, very little money for paying teachers well, relatively speaking, very little instruction time, and very little time for teachers to do anything else than teaching. And you can look at the same thing when you look at Finland and Sweden or the United States. These are two countries, Finland and Sweden, who are also not investing very much in education. But Finland is a lot more similar to Korea, and Sweden is a lot more similar than Luxembourg. When you look at this chart long enough, you'll see that actually most education systems that do better are more like Finland, are more like Korea. They prioritize the quality of teaching over the size of the system. That is not easy. That is very, very difficult to do. But in our assessment, is one of the things that Latvia will need to do. Teacher professionalization is another ingredient that we think is very, very important. Everybody talks about professionalization. What do we actually mean by that? Three things. Knowledge. You want your teachers to be professionals. Professional autonomy. You want to make sure that your teachers actually can exercise their own judgment. And you want to have teachers working in a collaborative culture. How does Latvia come out of it? Actually, quite good on autonomy. Teachers have a lot of discretion. They can make decisions, and your communities are very powerful. Knowledge, quite good.
But when you actually look at the collaborative culture in the system, connecting teachers, that's an area where Latvia is not doing so well. You compare that with an Asian education system, Malaysia or Singapore, that is where their major strengths are. Teachers may not have the same role of maneuvering in the classroom, deciding how they teach, what they teach, but they are constantly engaged in deep professional collaboration. It's an area which you miss. You have Italian teachers, you know, you're even stronger than Latvia on autonomy. They can do what they like, but actually they're not so strong on knowledge and not so strong on peer collaboration. Getting that triangle really working well. You can look to France, the country where I live, you know, knowledge of teachers is good, but again, there is no collaborative culture in the system. Teachers work in isolation. That's something sort of creating that kind of underpinning, professional underpinning for teachers is going to be very important. And you can see that in the results. You know, you compare, for example, professionalization. Overall, we praise your teaching force for its level of professionalization. But you can see Estonia, Singapore, New Zealand, England, Poland still doing better on it. In part, you know, because of professional responsibilities, in part because they're doing well on peer collaboration. You know, Shanghai, China, one of the top performing systems, very, very strong on professional collaboration. So it's something to think about. Why do I say this is important? It's even more nuanced. When you look at Latvia, you know, when it comes to informal exchange of information, Latvian teachers are very social people. You know, they discuss individual student results, they share resources, they basically collaborate with common students. But when you look at the kind of deeper collaboration that underpins the profession, you can see the bars get very short. Classroom observation. Looking what my neighbor teacher does. It doesn't happen in your country. Again, if you look to other countries, you can see it is a lot more common, particularly in East Asia, but that collaborative culture. Making sure that teachers learn from and with other teachers. In today's world, you know, the best minister of education can no longer solve the problems of tens of thousands of students and teachers. But if you can mobilize the talent of those teachers, bring them together, share their knowledge, work together, observe each other's classroom, you can achieve a lot in terms of improvement of outcomes. Why do I say this? We have seen that, you know, job satisfaction of teachers. Are teachers happy with their jobs? Actually doesn't depend on the size of the class. You find no relationship between whether teachers are happy and productive and the size of their class. No relationship. But job satisfaction does depend on whether teachers teach together, whether they observe each other's classes, whether they engage in joint activities, and whether they are taking part in collaborative life. Where you create a profession where teachers work together, you have happy teachers, you have effective teachers. Where teachers work in isolation, a small class is not going to help them become more effective. Very powerful kind of data that we can see from that. We also see, I mean, this is just what I said, basically, the perception of the status of the teaching. Teachers feel valued when they are working as a profession. They are more satisfied. They are more satisfied with their work environment. And they believe they are more effective teachers. Important agenda for that we are to work on, building on a high level. You're starting up from a strong point. So our recommendations here are to establish the conditions for a high quality teaching and leadership profession. When I talk about leadership, I don't talk about school principal to the law. I talk about leadership at every level of the education system. Teacher leadership, you know, principal leadership, system leadership. All of this is important. Aligning equity and excellence. I didn't say that at the beginning, but you know, Latvia is strong overall, improving. But when you look at the group of top performing students, that's where Latvia is, relatively speaking, the weakest. And they are an important engine for the success of the education. Making sure that all people actually fully capitalize on their talent is important. And you know, developing a more coherent approach to assessment and evaluation is something that we think is really, really of importance. Getting sort of a bit to vocational education, I'm going through this rather briefly, but we have actually seen that vocational education is not as prestigious in Latvia
as it is in some of your European counterparts, where you strive for parity. That's the goal that you set yourself long ago, you know, getting an equal number of students to get to vocational and academic high schools. Good aspiration, we're still quite far from it. It's not a question of places, it's a question of professional aspiration. It's a question of, you know, making sure that vocational education is not just academic education of a lower class, but actually brings the assets of vocational education to be a work-based learning, active engagement of employers. Those are the ingredients of successful vocational education training, and that is still quite a distance for Latvia to go. And you can see this in this data. When you basically think of people who say that vocational education offers high-quality learning, the share of people who believe in that is and people who say so typically talk about other people's children. When they send their own children, they go to academic education. So I think there's a lot, I think, many countries, but Latvia included, can do to make vocational education more of an attractive career choice. Integrating the worlds of learning and the worlds of work. Making sure that, you know, employers are involved, are engaged, providing a big part of the learning experience. That's the power of vocational education. Giving students possibilities to learn differently, not to learn at a lower level of quality, not to just sit in another type of school. And last but not least, lifelong learning. That's an area, you know, where Latvia has never been very strong. Compared to some of your Nordic neighbors, you know, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, those are countries where you can actually see lifelong, life-wide learning is now a reality for all. And in this fast-paced world, it's becoming increasingly important. You can no longer equip yourself for life. Having the kind of tools to continually to upgrade your schools, your skills, is going to be very, very important for you and your future. So what are our recommendations here is to continue improving the quality and relevance of vocational education, narrowing the divide between academic and vocational upper secondary education in quality and relevance, making sure that it's clearly articulated and integrated choice, and then increasing participation in lifelong learning. Very briefly on higher education, because we're going to talk about this at another conference just in a bit more time. System capacity in Latvia is not really reflecting the demographic decline. It's a huge challenge. You have actually been quite attractive, become quite attractive for international students. Very positive trend. More people from other countries are coming to Latvia to study, but still you have more people leaving your country than coming in. That is still something to basically solve. You can see the number of institutions here, basically, and then you can see the number of students. That doesn't work. Again, the same picture. The system has been frozen, the number of people have declined. This is the opportunity for Latvia to enter into what we call smart specialization. Making sure that in fewer things, that getting from a one-size-fits-all system to actually having institutions responding to where the true opportunities are. Being more convincing to young people to study those kinds of things that are going to change their lives, rather than what institutions offer. Who tells a young person in Latvia the truth about, you know, where is your future? They know what the universities provide, they can enroll in the courses that are given, but who is telling your young people about, you know, what is the future if you go that path? Very hard for someone to find out. And that doesn't make it easier. It creates the wrong incentives for institutions to promote the status quo as opposed to, you know, thinking about specialization. You can do that also system capacity. You have institutions that provide something, but their demand is actually participation is improving. You know, I shouldn't ignore that. You know, you can see actually progress from 2004 to 2014, but those areas are still very small. Science, engineering, those areas that offer today the best opportunities for Latvia to become an engine for Europe's success are not ones that are part of the current system, and the system is holding back probably too many young people to make the kind of choices that can change their lives in the best possible way. Money, no, again, last one in the list. That is something, you look at spending per student, long way Latvia has to go to catch up with countries that, even with the OECD average. I don't want to say that spending per student is an indicator of the quality of provision. You have proven that wrong for many years. You provide much better quality than what we see in spending per student. But, you know, is this sustainable in the future? Important doubts. So again, it comes to tough choices. You have one pillar already working. You know, you fund people on the basis of inputs. That's easy to do. You just look at how many students are enrolled. You pay them for it. But, you know, it's time to also, in our view, to think about outcomes. What about completion, successful completion? What about, you know, success in research? How can we reflect those success indicators in the financing of higher education? And last but not least, perhaps this is the most important part. How can we incentivize institutions to add value, to innovate, to become frontier thinkers, as opposed to promoting the status quo? So a more differentiated funding model, again, you know, you spend very little per student, just spending more per student will not change anything. More money will not make anyone work differently. But thinking about, you know, the good thing is that you already have plans to invest more in higher education. But think about how we use that money to encourage performance and innovation. It's going to be absolutely key in our analysis. So what do we advise here is financing, changing the model, continuing improving the quality of tertiary education and science. Quality is very hard to assess, but you know, the kind of labor market outcomes that we see from this give us some sense of what the education is worth for people. System capacity, you know, demographic line, fiscal realities, labor market relevance, very important parts, and then also strategic management and leadership, thinking about higher education more as a system. Those are the kind of things that we think are at the heart of the future of success. It's about shared vision. It's about stronger emphasis on performance measurement, making success visible, aligning resources and incentives with success. It's about frontline capacity. It's easy to say, hard to do. You put a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of local communities, a lot, much more than most countries do. If you want to do that, you have to build the kind of intellectual, operational, managerial capacity for them to manage the human resources, to work together, to work as a system. And last but not least, it's all about delivery architecture, making the reform happen. Once again, we see Latvia as a model of success. You have demonstrated in the past that you can raise outcomes in the most difficult economic circumstances, but the future is going to be a lot more demanding, not just on Latvia, but on the world as a whole. And again, once again, your education systems today is your economy tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Paldies Šleihera kungam tiešām par to, ka varbūt mazākā stundā mums bija iespēja ne tikai soli pa solim iziet cauri visām izglītības pakāpēm un veidiem, bet daudzkārt plašākā kontekstā paskatīties, kur izglītības sistēmas piedāvājums tāds, kāds viņš ir šobrīd tādā kontekstā, tas atspoguļo mūsu, patiesībā, valsts nākotni un cik liela atbildība gulstas uz mūsu pleciem. No organizatoriskā viedokļa šobrīd mums būs 15 minūtes laika jautājumiem un intervijām, jo 10. turpinās nākošā diskusija, kas ir vairāk fokusēta par augstāko izglītību un zinātni. Un atgādināšu, ka rīt savukārt mēs turpinām prezentāciju un diskusiju izglītības pakāpēs no pirmsskolas līdz vidējo pakāpi ieskaitot. Tā kā turpināsim arī rītdien šīs diskusijas, bet šobrīd varbūt tātad jūsu komentāri, viedokļi, jautājumi, un tad dosim iespēju arī mediju pārstāvjiem uzrunāt ministru kungu un Šleihera kungu. Lūdzu. Mārtiņ. pieņemu, ka tas ir, es to varētu tulkot tā, ka tas radīs pietiekami daudz vielu pārdomām, man liekas, izējot cauri visai valsts dzīvē. Jā, lūdzu, ja jūs varētu stādīties priekšā.
There's a very strong view in this country that in order to kind of improve excellence in the education system and to move our country forward, that we should identify early our most talented pupils, put them in selected boarding schools, and then give them the best education we can. So that would be a way we can actually move forward and develop our economy. So I'm understanding your comments about selectivity and equity and kind of approaches members are taking on that advice.
Yeah, you know, that's actually been a quite common attitude in Europe for many years, many decades. Is not actually what our evidence and data supports. In fact, most countries that have put their emphasis on stratifying societies, you know, selecting students early, have not been very good in ensuring equity, but also not been so good in ensuring excellence. That may be surprising to you, but that's what our data very clearly show. If you look at the best performing education systems and having the highest group of top performers, you know, Finland in Europe, Shanghai in China, Canada and North America, they're actually very, very strongly focused on making sure that every student has access to excellent teaching. You can ask me, you know, why is this? You know, why is it sounds very intuitive to select people and then to hope that the best performers. We are not very good in the prognostic validity of early judgments on the future of children. We think we are good at it. But in actually many selection decisions that we make are based on a social background or reflect the context where students come from, not academic talent and teaching. So, you know, the answer is more about how can we foster talent, how can we continuously have the highest expectations for every student at every moment and raise student aspirations. It's also often, you know, selection sets the wrong incentives for teachers and schools. What it tells me as a teacher often is, you know, oh well, you know, I didn't do so well for this student, I'm going to put that student in a lower performance track, because teachers and schools are much more inclined to actually downgrade students and upgrade students. If you're a teacher in a school, you know, why would you want to give your best student away? Those students are kept in the class. We're getting rid of the students not so great, much harder to work with. So I must say, from our evidence and research, you know, the answer is more personalization of education. Having a good understanding as a teacher that students learn differently and maybe differently at different stages of their life, and addressing that diversity with differentiated pedagogical practice. That is more of an answer than, you know, grouping and selecting and stratifying schools. That, at least from the data that we have on that.
Paldies. Jā, es pieņemu, ka komentārs bija saprotams, mums nav nepieciešams pārtulkot. Lūdzu.
Hello, my name is Andreass from Riga Technical University. You indicated that in Latvia there's, for the existing number of students, there are too many higher education institutions. What are your examples in other OECD countries? How are they coping with this problem?
Well, you know, not all of the countries face the demographic situation of Latvia, you know, and in many OECD countries we are still seeing a significant rise in the demand for higher education. But those where we do face a decline, some have done it badly, just, you know, cutting everybody, making smaller institutions even smaller, and that's sort of the worst thing you can do. Some have been able to cut strategically, you know, consolidating, specializing, making sure that, you know, universities get the support where they are strongest, having good competition on, you know, research funding, get the smartest ideas, the best ideas being financed, having a certain degree of specialization on teaching. Those are the examples that we have seen. You know, that, and it's difficult, but I must say, I think this is also a very important opportunity for Latvia to get to a more flexible, differentiated, innovation-oriented higher education system. The current size of institutions in our assessment is not sustainable. It's not where you reach world-class standards. And today, you know, you have to see, and I think you do that, you have to see yourself as a player in the global higher education landscape. It's no longer a domestic field of policy where you can just, you know, gradually, you have to see what happens elsewhere. It is smart specialization that is dominating the field today.
in the countries that have to get to a smaller scale.
Kolēģi, vēl kāds jautājums? Tad teiksim paldies šīs dienas audiencēm, dosim iespēju tad mēdījiem vēl papildus vērst